Okay, and we move on out of the Middle East into Africa. In Africa, like Southeast Asia, like India, during the time of European imperialism, had been almost completely taken over. We remember that Ethiopia and Liberia were the only two countries that were not taken over by European powers. And the old story still goes the same, that where the European powers took control, especially during the time of European imperialism, these areas have been left in very poor conditions, to say the least. Between World War I and World War II, just like in Southeast Asia and in India, the African countries worked towards getting their independence, but were unable to do so. After World War II, a new movement to get independence begun. And in a large part, all the Europeans were just looking to get rid of their colonies. The Brits and the French were busy rebuilding. They didn't have the money or the effort to spend on colonies. The whole power prestige game had lost its appeal. America was now the big dog in the Soviet Union, and they were happy focusing on themselves. We're going to see some dates here. In 57, the British give back the Gold Coast. 1960, Congo, Nigeria, Kenya, and Uganda get their independence. The French give back most of West Africa by 1962, but by 1962 they give back Algeria. The thing about Algeria is that there were 1 million plus French who lived in Algeria. So they had a harder time wanting to give it up. Algeria is Mediterranean land. Let's just take a look. Algeria is right here, right in the Mediterranean coast. So the French didn't want to give it up as quickly as maybe they wanted to give up some of their other lands. And slowly but surely, all of Africa was given back to its people. Angola, 1975. Ethiopia remained independent. The very eastern areas here, your Eritrea and Djibouti, 70, and then 1993 for Eritrea. Now South Africa, and if we look at this map, is very deceptive, okay? Because South Africa, it says they were given back their independence in 1910, but in reality, it wasn't until 1994 that the South Africans got independence. In 1910, the British gave up control to the government of South Africa, who was ruled by Brits. South Africa, like Algeria, was the place where there was largest European population centers. There was a bunch of Algerians, French, in Algeria. And just the old story goes the same, where the Europeans went, those countrymen came back to their country. So right now, France has large Algerian population. Britain has large Indian population, and also we'll see that in South Africa, there was a large British population as well. And the Brits aren't going to want to give up power there. They give power to a government that is made up of Brits. And these Brits, who are now the South African government, independent of Britain, they say, create a government system that allows them to keep power and keeps the native Africans out of power. Or the Asians. South Africa had a pretty large Indian population. Well, this policy was called apartheid, or apartness. It's basically segregation. It gave the land, the large landowners were European, British people largely, and they had all the power. The native Africans had no power in terms of voting rights. Voting is the #1 step towards equal power. They were forced to live separately, segregated in society. Black South Africans were not allowed to vote. until 1991. They were not allowed to own land outside of the segregated areas, and they were not allowed to hold power in government offices. Mixed marriages were illegal, as they were also in the United States till the Loving Supreme Court case of 1967. 8 small years before I was born, interracial marriage was illegal in America. Is that possible? Wow, things were really different before I was born. Just a short period of time. And many Black South Africans fought against these laws after World War II, including one man by the name of Nelson Mandela, who would be imprisoned in 1960 for blowing up government buildings. Just kind of as an interesting fact here. Oh, I don't like when my charts do that, but I love charts. This is going to be income of different ethnic groups, and the power structure put in place, it kind of labeled people weirdly, right? There was white people, Europeans, Asian people, who a lot of these people were Indians. Then there were colored people, and then there were Black people. This was how South African labeled their people during this period. And if you look, you can see that, I guess maybe the Asian group after the 80s. Here's the apartheid. Let's look at the apartheid period. Everyone, other than white people, were making 20% of what white people were making. Indians maybe moved up to the 30% range. After apartheid, we still see these numbers are incredibly low for anyone who's not white, especially if you're a Black South African, which means you're probably native to the land. You're still making less than 20% of what white people are making in this time. There's a movement. When I'm a kid, I don't remember much from the 80s other than like Scooby-Doo and Lakers and Magic, but I remember that one of the political movements I would see around town would say, "Free Mandela." Interestingly, President Barack Obama got his start in politics at Occidental College in Eagle Rock, California, in this movement, in the Free Mandela movement of the 80s. And apartheid slowly comes to an end. I mean, let's face it, segregation ended in America in the 50s, 60s, call it the 60s. There were still sundown towns, even in California in the 60s. So segregation, we'll say, ends in the 60s, or at least is moving that way. Some say segregation still exists. Not time for that conversation. But apartheid doesn't really start ending until the 90s in South Africa. There were protests against this. Some people who protested were all different sides of the protested against this. It wasn't just one side protesting against the end of apartheid. In 1994, South Africa has its first free elections, and Nelson Mandela is elected president. Here's Nelson Mandela with Bill Clinton, both presidents in the 90s. Violence has been a problem in South Africa, though, in the last 30 years. Once, this is the old story, isn't it? When the Europeans come in, they take over. When they leave a broken system. And what you can see, and this is the murder, this is the murder rate map of the world. I don't know if the gray area means no data. Okay, but look, the darkest color is in South Africa and in Brazil and some of these South American countries. The US is pretty dark colored. Europe is maybe the lightest area, or Saudi Arabia. But yeah, they have a violence problem in South Africa. There's murdering that goes on of people. The country is a mess. One of the things that happens is that in the 10 years or 12 years after the end of apartheid, a lot of white farmers leave. The whites had all the land, the good land and the farms. And when they left, they took a lot of their farming knowledge with them, a lot of their money with them, which, if you have me in economics, you'll understand the circular flow of money takes that money out of the circular flow. The flow is a smaller circle of money. There's less money to go around. South Africa, since the end of apartheid, has really been getting worse, not better, economically. In 2017, it was found that 72% of the nation's private farmlands are still owned by Europeans, by white people, although the Europeans only make up 9% of the population. And unlike in Algeria, at the end of apartheid, not all the Europeans left. There's still, I believe, close to 3 million European farmers left there. Farmers alone, this isn't city people. But the stories go, the Europeans oftentimes have the best jobs and most money. And right now, 47% of South Africans live below the poverty line. You say, man, that's really high. Yeah, but if you look at the map of Africa, remember, we're often going to talk about Sub Saharan Africa, right, as what sometimes is referred to as Black Africa. And up here, as my Black Studies professors would teach me, would be Semitic North Africa. Is this the Middle East? That's how some people call it. South Africa is actually one of the least poor countries. This is GDP. This is about average salary, money per year. You're looking at between $10,000 and $20,000 a year for these people, and that's high. There are areas in South Africa where people are living, in Africa, where people are living on less than $2,000 a year or $4,000, or just Africa. After Europeans left, was left in terrible poverty. Let's move on to Africa as a whole. One of the things that happened after European imperialism ended was that there was a Pan-African movement, just like a Pan-Arabian movement, where they wanted to bring all Africa together. Sub Saharan Africa, let's just be one big group. This never happened, but Africa has been able to form some organizations that have worked to unify Africa, really in a way that didn't quite happen in the Middle East, which is maybe why there hasn't been as much war there. The OAU, or the Organization of African Unity, was created, and it kind of kept the Soviets and the Americans out of influencing because they stuck together. Unity, folks, so important. Please pay attention, America. Many of these leaders were educated in the US and European style, and they wanted to set up Western style democracies, or maybe they like communism. They allowed the Western influence to be there, but unfortunately, a lot of these governments weren't successful. And what oftentimes happens is the military takes over. You have military coups, the general just takes over and still runs the show. In the 1990s, more African states chose democracy, but now sometimes you only have one real party to choose from. This is a freedom status map of Africa in general, and the only free states are down here in the south and Ghana. But we just heard how hard it was on the South Africans to get their freedom. These yellow states are considered partly free. This is mostly French West Africa, and maybe over here in the east, where the Brits were largely in control. But really, huge chunks of Africa are considered completely not free, especially in the central and northeastern regions, and in Semitic North Africa as well. And we say, look, most African countries really struggle economically. They made most of their money by exporting crops or natural resources, gold, diamonds. When crop prices failed or went down there, or there was a drought or a famine, families where people were devastated. When Western countries' demand for natural resources dried up, oil is another big one. Nigeria has a lot of oil. These African countries suffered dramatically. As oil prices fluctuate, so do the success and not success of the oil-producing African nations. Especially there's stories of the diamond mines hiring kids and having a huge amount of control in the government and just treating the people awfully. Poverty is a huge problem in Sub-Saharan Africa. And I want to take a look at this map before we move on to the last point. This is another poverty map, but there's more to this one, okay? So the darker brown is the richer African countries. Again, this is really not rich compared to like Europe and the US, even Latin America. The truth be told, like the majority of the world's poor countries are in Africa or Southeast Asia. Areas the Europeans ruled. Thank you, imperialism. But look at this. This is also going to be an adolescent fertility rate. An adolescent fertility rate means, how many women, girls, between the ages of 15 to 19 have babies out of 1,000. And you're going to find that in these, especially in the very poor countries, okay, if your light greens, that is really, really common for young girls to have babies. And then in the countries that are a little less, let's not talk about North African, separate culturally, you're going to see that there's less young girls or young women. I don't know. I mean, look, our value in America is that, girl hits adulthood at 18, and in other countries that's not the case. Some places 16, and some places maybe as young as 14. So I shouldn't push my values too hard. But you can see that there's a connection between poverty and adolescent birth rate, young women having babies. And I would beg to argue that that's the case everywhere. At least my experience in America. Look, if you have babies young, there's a stronger chance you're going to live in poverty. But really, it's evident here in this map. And then lastly, one of the things that has happened in Africa is that HIV/AIDS came in and hit Africa huge in the 80s and 90s. It's a huge problem. Now, understand, when we look at this, right, the North African communities, they have like strict Islamic culture, fundamentalists. Young people aren't having babies because, you're not going to probably engage in activities like that until you're married, right? But in Sub-Saharan Africa, that's not the case. And specifically down south, HIV has taken over in some of these areas. Look at this. There are countries where 25+% of the population has HIV/AIDS, and they don't have the medical resources. I know that like after, the 90s, early 90s, Magic comes out as being HIV positive. There's a push hard to get medicine, and now people with HIV can live long lives, right? Before, when I was a kid, it was like you get HIV, you die in 5 years less. Poor AZ, right? Or all those people. And now there's medicine, but these people don't have access to the medicine. Look at the high level of HIV/AIDS. That's mind-blowing. But there are places in the world today where 1 out of every 4 people plus have HIV/AIDS. Young people, 15 to 49. And these places are oftentimes places where there's not access to medicine. It's a death sentence, and they don't get it. They don't understand it. There are stories there of just horrendous stories I've heard that come out of these areas that are oftentimes not city areas, they're more village areas, and they don't understand what's happening to them. Some whole cities, the entire age group here will get wiped out by HIV, and then they would have these weird rumors how I can't even talk about it here, but it's a problem. It's a big problem in South Africa and some of these places. And what do we say? If there's one underlying message in this entire chapter, it's that where European imperialism was, these countries have been left a mess in varying ways for varying reasons. But there's no doubt that these countries were negatively impacted by European imperialism.